Good evening, everyone. Thank you to our audience for being here in the room with us today. My name is Denise Forsthuber. I'm Deputy Director of the Europe Center at the Atlantic Council, and I am delighted to kick off this next leg of our Central Europe Week conference here live from Prague. Thank you to those in the room here. Thank you to our global audience who are tuning into the live stream. We are delighted now to kick off this next session on Ukraine's security and Europe's stability. But just very briefly before I get started and turn over to my colleague for introducing the next speaker, I want to give a very quick thank you to all of the partners that have made Central Europe Week possible this year, from our think tank partners in the region, some of whom are with us here today, to our partners in Washington, D.C., LOT Polish Airlines, Google, our strategic partner for the conference, and importantly, Jagiello 2000 and NATO Public Diplomacy Division, who have really made this Prague leg of our programming possible. So without further ado, please allow me to very quickly turn it over to Zbynek Pawlaczek of Jagiello 2000, who will introduce our honored keynote speaker for tonight before our moderator, Ms. Shelby Magee, Deputy Director of the Eurasia Center at the Atlantic Council, moderates our panel with our distinguished experts. Thank you, and please allow me to turn over the floor.
Denise, thank you very much. And I'll be very brief. Let me make just two brief remarks. Firstly, thank you very much. Our appreciation goes to Atlantic Council for your ongoing focus to Central Europe region and for your very unique program of the Central European Week, because this year we're commemorating the 25th anniversary of the very first NATO enlargement, and even more, that's important to keep our Central European and US dialogue. Secondly, I'm very honored, and let me express our thanks for Karel Řeka. He accepted our invitation because he's a very tough time period, so thank you very much, Karel. Maybe it's not there is not some special need to make some special introduction for the famous Chief of Defense. Let me just say, and that this is for second time when General Řeka has accepted our invitation to be speaker at our joint event of Atlantic Council and Jagiello 2000, because the very first went very successfully in Houston, in Texas, just a day after the NATO summit, and that was for very first time when we have exported the NATO agenda to this part of the United States. So, Karel, thank you very much once again, and the floor is yours.
Ladies and gentlemen, I would say I'm maybe too famous as a joke. Okay, so I asked Zbynek what is expected from me, and he said, well, don't worry, we'll guide you, just try to say something smart. So I will. I think the topic is the Ukraine and the future of European security. So I'll just mention a couple of points. I think we all agree that the outcome of the war in Ukraine will determine the future security of the Europe. Future behavior of Russia, but also future direction of Ukraine, but not only Europe, but also other regions. There is a linear equation between the degree of our support to Ukraine, the extent of Russian emboldenment, and also the scale of Ukrainian frustration, and they are very much frustrated already. I think we need to understand that the Russia war against Ukraine and the situation in the Middle East, but also in the Indo-Pacific and other regions, are communicating vessels, and it's all interconnected. There is a globalization of war in Ukraine already. There's a Chinese support, Iranian support. There's also North Korean troops already on the ground, and that's also reflected in the other regions. And the Indo-Pacific partners are watching very closely. Even some of the communications I have privately with some of the diplomats, but also formally within the NATO, I can say some of those partners are watching maybe more closely than we do here in Europe. And that has a reason. we need to provide Ukraine a realistic future in the Euro-Atlantic community, and we need to provide them some guarantees. And I think that will be really tough after their historical experience. And I cannot really imagine sufficient guarantees except for some kind of NATO future and NATO invitation. And we need to speed up support, not only military, but also economical, financial, and training and everything, basically, to Ukrainians right now. The time is now. I think the situation is really serious there, and you can watch it objectively, but also I was there recently. If you talk to our counterparts, you can see the difference in their perception also. So the situation is serious, and I think in next maybe 2-3 months, it will be probably even more important to support them, because the Russians see this window of opportunity now, and it's interconnected to what is happening in America politically. And I think it's time now to do as much as we can. The Europe needs to stop talking, and we need to start acting as a geopolitical adult, and we're still not. And it's not only about Ukraine, it's also about Africa, Sahel, and other regions. We will need to increase defense spending, and we'll have to grow our capabilities. It's not only about 2%. I think we'll need to start talking more about capabilities as militaries than how many percent we spend. 2% is a welcome increase here in Czech Republic, but actually it's if you're serious about the deterrence and collective defense, you cannot talk 2%. You know, the figure needs to start with 3. Actually, that's the reality if you look at the capabilities. And we need to boost defense production. We as militaries, obviously, we need to be ready for any outcome of the war in Ukraine, whatever it's going to be. And it's really key, not only for any potential conflict, but it's key especially for prevention of the conflict. And I would say it's first more about deterrence than defense, really, and we should keep it this way. But it's not only about militaries, it's about whole of government and whole of society approach, and it's about resilience, because military is just one of the tools. We must also nurture the transatlantic bond. For Czech Republic, it is one of our foreign policy priorities to keep the transatlantic bond strong, and I think it will be increasingly difficult if we don't pull our share and if we don't do our homework first here on the defense. The security of allies and partners is also indivisible. So you cannot divide security of Europe from security of North America and security of Indo-Pacific and other regions, because it is truly interconnected. And last but not least, we talked in a few past years. We talked a lot about hybrid threats, and I think it's becoming a real reality. It's not theory anymore. We can see it increasingly more and more here, and it's not only about disinformation. It's also about physical attacks, about sabotage, espionage, but also other things like diplomatic measures, issuing citizenships, visa, economy shares in critical sectors of economy and stuff like that. So we also need to start being really serious about this. And what we learn as a military now, more and more, is that most of the areas in the hybrid threats are out of the military responsibility, but then the executability of our plans is really dependent on the other areas. And what it means is that we really need to pull together as the whole of state and the whole of government, not just the military. So I would stop here. Hopefully it was a little smart, Zbigněk, and it's I guess it's a starter for the discussion. Thank you.
Hi, everyone. I'm Shelby Magid, Deputy Director of the Atlantic Council's Eurasia Center, and I think that was a very smart discussion, so hopefully we keep it up with our panel. But we've got an expert lineup, and really a pleasure to be here. As Denise mentioned, the panel is called Ukraine Security and Europe Stability, and I think this is the perfect place to have the conversation. I help run our Ukraine work in Washington, D.C., and I know how valuable the Czech voice is. So thank you all, and thank you to our panel for being here. We're going to have a moderated discussion with them, and then we'll turn to audience Q&A. So for our audience in person, we'll have a microphone for you. And for our audience online, you can pitch your questions at askac.org and make them hard. All right, now to our panel. It's my pleasure to introduce, first I'll turn to our Czech voice, Dr. Thomas Kopečný, Czechia's Special Envoy for Reconstruction of Ukraine. In addition to his current responsibilities, he has an extensive background focused on defense issues and also great style.
Thank you. Thank you. I appreciate it a lot.
We're joined by my AC colleague and senior fellow, Ian Brzezinski. Ian has significant experience in U.S. national security matters, having served in senior policy positions in the U.S. Department of Defense, including as Deputy Assistant Secretary of Defense for Europe and NATO policy. And last but not least, we're joined by Mykola Belouskov, who's a fellow at the National Institute for Strategic Studies in Kyiv under the Ukrainian president and a senior analyst at Come Back Alive Initiative Center in Ukraine. Mykola, thank you for joining us from Kyiv. We know it's a long journey, so glad to have you here. Can you please start us off by describing the current situation on the battlefield?
First of all, thank you very much for invitation, and it's great to hear firsthand all these words of support. It's really important. And turning to military situation, well, Ukraine is forced to adopt the strategy that we've seen in the first month of the big war, when we basically trade space for Russian losses. Unfortunately, we don't have a luxury, we don't have opportunity to defend the current front line as we did in 2023. That's why you see that front line is moving. It's moving in Russian favor, but the price is high. So basically, Ukrainian hope is that we would manage to treat Russians quicker than they would be able to take control of the Donetsk region. At least that's what's happening on the ground. And I understand people want to see more successes, but strategy is the art of possible. And within all the constraints we have, that's the only strategy we can pursue. That's the situation on the ground. Simultaneously, Russia resumed striking Ukrainian critical infrastructure. We've seen two waves of a major strike after temperature decreased to below zero. And yes, we have some damage and we have some stabilization cuts, but the state is functioning. But we should be prepared for further strikes. In general, you might look at the front line. Front line is moving. And for sure, that's have a negative impact. But Russia is banking on its holistic serial victory, which not about just military defeat of Ukraine. They want to combine some local advances, local success, because by standards of World War II, these are minor advances. It's not a deep offensive operation, classic one. But they want to combine these minor advances, especially in the Donetsk region, Pokrovsk, Kurakhova directions, to undermine two very important consensuses. One outside Ukraine, that Ukraine should be aided, and one inside Ukraine. It was already mentioned that these consensuses are really important. And if Russia managed to undermine these consensuses, then, of course, these advances are strategic. But in itself, militarily on the ground, they are not strategic. So that's the most important thing to keep in mind. And in general, my last point in this case, that 580,000 troops grouping of forces Russians have now, according to Ukrainian military intelligence. It's not enough both to defeat Ukrainian grouping of forces first, and second, to take control of the country, which is now 30 million people, but still huge one, with a number of people, if we preserve internal cohesion and if we preserve at least current level of international support. So don't be tacticians, be people with a strategic mindset.
Thank you very much for that. Now, Ian, let's turn to the DC perspective. As we know, there's been much discussion on how the war may soon reach a turning point when President-elect Trump takes office. How do you expect the incoming Trump administration will approach Russia's war in Ukraine? Easy question.
Thanks, Shelby. Let me thank you, Denise, Paul, and speaking of, for bringing me out to Prague. You can't beat Christmas in Prague. What's Trump going to do? I'm a little bit concerned because I look at what he has said and what his advisors have said. And what he has said is that he believes that Ukraine caused this war, its aspiration to join NATO and the support of the United States and others for those aspirations triggered this war. He's vented against the amount of assistance that's gone to Ukraine to keep it on in the battle. He's warned about the risk of nuclear war that this conflict and our support to Ukraine raises. He has described this as a conflict of a European interest versus a transatlantic or a U.S. interest. He's emphasized that he wants the killing to stop. He's called Putin a genius in his move on this, which to me kind of infers he looks at the territorial losses in Ukraine as water over the dam. And he's repeatedly said that his biggest success in the national security realm is not having a large-scale war drawing in U.S. troops during his last 4 years. He wants to be a president of peace. He doesn't want to have another endless war on his chart. And he's, as I said, extremely worried about nuclear war. And then you talk about his advisors, and you get a little bit more specific. And it sounds something along the lines, and you've probably all heard this. He'll go to Putin, say, cease and desist, or I'll arm the Ukrainians to the teeth. He'll go to Zelensky, say, cease and desist, or I'll cut off your assistance. I want a ceasefire with a peace zone that'll be manned not by any Americans, and Ukraine will be indefinitely neutral. Some say 20 years, some say never. So that's the starting point. That's what's said. That's the official position out there. To me, that's troubling. But without going on too long, there's possibility to shape that. And I think there are three kind of key points that Europeans need to make, three actions Europeans needs to make. They need to leverage Trump's fear of another wide war. And I think you can make a case that Ukraine is part of three major contingencies: high-intensity war in Europe, rising violence in the Middle East, increasing Chinese provocations and aggression in the Indo-Pacific, that are really on the edge of metastasizing into a global conflagration. And preventing that is going to be the number one issue that Trump faces when he returns to the Resolute desk in the White House. And that creates an order priority. De-escalating the conflict, ending the conflict in Ukraine is the number one priority to prevent that war, wider war, from happening, from drawing America into a hot conflict. Second, if he's really committed to peace through strength, he doesn't want to go out of the starting blocks making Chamberlain-like concessions to Putin. That will probably result in a catastrophe and violence and brutality that will make Biden's withdrawal from Afghanistan look like a walk in the park. And then the third kind of case I think the Europeans need to make is that they're prepared to be the backbone of a deterrent force. Because there will not be peace on the European frontier if Ukraine's left on its own. No matter how much equipment we give it, Putin will continue to drive and attack and attack and attack. But Trump, and perhaps fairly, is not going to think of a deterrent force the way we've done it in the past, which is 80% American troops coming back in with a smattering of Europeans. Europe now needs to stand up and say, we're ready to be the backbone of a deterrent force. I don't know how big that is. I'm intrigued that the Poles and the French seem to be talking along these lines. It's going to have to be significant. It's going to have to be in country. It's going to have robust fires, air defense. But I think if Europeans come in and say, we're willing to do this, and America provides, let's say, 20% of it, largely in the form of command and control, maybe some fires, and an air defense bubble with aircraft reinforced by Europeans, you might be able to make the case. Because then you help them avoid a war that brings in U.S. troops. You help him avoid a humiliation that ruins his strategy of peace through strength. And you help him bring to the table the fact that Europeans are doing their share of the burden. And that's a victory for him.
Thank you, Ian. Dr. Kopechny, Ian set us up talking about the potential wider war. So, as we know, transatlantic support for Ukraine, including ongoing military and economic aid, reconstruction support, and potentially support for Ukraine's NATO accession, is crucially also an investment in fortifying the U.S. and allies against the growing collaboration among Russia's partners in China, Iran, and North Korea. How do Central European governments view this threat and the cooperation between these powers?
We obviously view it very negatively. as everyone in the alliance in Europe. But we also need to understand the depth of it and the scope of it and the potential that will only unfold in the upcoming months. Everybody was quite shocked by the very presence of a few thousand, up to 10,000 North Korean troops in first Russia, Kursk region operations, and then Eastern theater of operations in Ukraine. Now it's just the beginning. You know, there will be many times more than 10 times more are expected to come to Ukraine. And it's not only about the life force that North Korea is providing in exchange for technologies. It's also been, obviously, we all know that the technological exchange or support from North Korean, but also from Iranian side. So there's a clear axis, there's a clear alliance with a tacit but very clear and technologically crucial support from China, which is the economic backbone of this alliance. Now, what we need to understand is the total combination and the potential in the upcoming years of the total figures of all the military equipment that is crucial for the battlefield, such as large caliber ammunition, artillery systems, main battle tanks, heavy military equipment, but also the life force. And compare this with the alliance. I mean, it's a word that every Ukrainian and most of us here would hope for, the alliance, but say the coalition, the group of partners that is surrounding and supporting Ukraine. And what is the total combination? What is the total count of the addition of all the forces together? And you need to be keeping this in the charts for the next year, for the next 6 months, 24 months, so that you could see a practical vision for the future of the battlefield itself. Of course, we all hope for a ceasefire that will come not within 24 hours, but maybe within, I don't know, I don't want to say 24 weeks, maybe 24 months, I don't know. We are all very hopeful for that, of course. The crucial question is not what the Ukrainians would be okay with. The crucial question is what Putin would be okay with to start the discussion. Sincerely, honestly, everybody remembers very well all the Minsk I, Minsk II discussions. So this is how we view the coalition or the alliance that has been brought together and that has really gone very deep in coordination of all the activities. That's why it should and does concern South Korea, Japan, Taiwan. That's why it should and does concern Israel. Because it's an exchange. It's really an alliance that goes always. And what we also do see, and that's the hope for the future, yeah, Minister Lipovsky has very rightly said, we all want Ukraine in this country, in NATO, in the region, definitely. Do we think it's going to happen soon? I mean, I don't know. We're probably live streaming, so I will not respond directly. Okay. But it's important to be realistic. That will be my answer. Yeah? It will take time, a lot of time. It will take a lot of time to get them into the EU, where we want them. But it will take a lot of time. What do we do in the meantime is the crucial thing. It's the guarantee, and it's our response to the alliance that has been brought. So we're talking about coalitions of the willing that would send forces, that would, after the ceasefire, by the way, every time after the ceasefire, yeah, in Ukraine. We do see ideas about coalitions of the willing of all sorts. But in my mind, what is the most important is not the concepts, it's what is actually working. So we have already in place 4 sort of coalitions or of the willing or coordination systems for the delivery of military material, of large caliber ammunition. Czech Ammunition Initiative, but also newly the Estonian government is trying to do something. The Danish government is pushing this, like Ukrainian angle, Ukrainian industry angle, very admiring. And the Brits do their part. So we do have coalitions of the willing on different agendas of different activities, and we need to be working with them and through them so that we counterbalance whatever is being created now on the axis of 3 countries with the backbone of China, but with BRICS and with many in the global south. It's a nasty term, I know, but with many other countries, there will be more partners, there will be more troops from other countries, there will be more weapons from other countries in Russia's favor.
Thank you. Mykola, I want to give you a chance to respond to any of that, but also ask you, how do Ukrainians view the changes that might happen under President-elect Trump and that we're discussing these potential ceasefires? And do you see a real likelihood that negotiations could actually take place?
Well, first of all, the major difference, if you compare situation now in 2016, there was more nervousness. So in 2016, people didn't expect Trump to be elected. Now, people calculate the chances more honestly, I would say, and rightly. So there is no this kind of nervousness, gloom and doom, but for sure we also track the signals that are sent, and the signals are very mixed, and they are explained by the very simple fact because Trump assembled very diverse coalition of people around him to first be elected as a candidate for Republican Party and then to win these elections. But you know, we make our position clear, and we want people to understand that there should be a balance between any kind of attempt to have a quick settlement, for the settlement to be durable and stable. So if we find the right balance, then Ukraine is fine with this durability of settlement, especially, and that's the most important for Ukraine. And then we come back to ideas raised by Volodymyr Zelensky that Ukraine negotiation positions should be strengthened here and now through the inflow of weaponry. Basically, it's about like a conventional escalation here and now to stabilize the front line, because right now Russians, they proceed from very simple assumption. We do not need negotiations, we can create new reality on the ground. That's why, what is the purpose, what is the reason? And basically it's not Ukraine that should be given some kind of incentives to sit down on a table, it is Russia, precisely. So that's a very important point that was mentioned. And second point, it's about long-term durability, because we are a country that is traumatized first by Budapest Memorandum, second we are traumatized by Minsk I, Minsk II. And basically, right now when someone is raising the issue of framework, agreement, it should pass the very simple test, and it is a test durability, because otherwise, let's imagine the situation that there is an agreement, but agreement with no guardrails, with no proper balance of power, balance of threat to underpin this. And then there are real chances that Russia would recover and in next 5, 7, 10 years would repeat what it done in 2022, do another land grab, and who knows whether this land grab might be mortal for Ukraine. So that's the major scene we have in mind, that we are open to any kind of exchange of perspectives right now, then maybe formal negotiations, but we should create conditions on the ground through the escalation away, through a proper attrition balance, and then long-term durability and sustainability. So if it's done, then Ukraine is open to earnest exchange of perspectives. Otherwise, Ukraine basically is not given a chance. So if your choice is a simple one, either fight now, even if situation deteriorates, but with some chances for success, or just kicking can down the road knowing that your country is doomed, then it's better to fight. Right now, even without guarantee for success and situation deteriorating, then kicking can down the road knowing that the situation, the tragedy would repeat itself. So that's how we actually assess the situation, and as others, we are waiting to 20th of January 2025 for the inauguration, and then we are ready to work based on everything that I mentioned, basically.
Great, thank you. Ian, do you want to jump in there?
Sure. I mean, look, I don't think we're going to get a ceasefire with Russia when we come up to them and go, we want to negotiate. When you go to Putin and say, I want a negotiation, you may as well just go up and wave a white flag, because he looks at that as a concession. If you want to get into his mindset, you have to think the way a Soviet KGB officer thinks. You have to think about the correlation of forces. And the only way you're going to get Putin to come to you looking for a ceasefire is when he feels that there's no chance that he can gain any more territory, or that he's actually losing territory, or maybe on the verge of losing the war and his regime. And the way you change the correlation of forces is you recognize you're in a war. And this is a war not just against Ukraine, but a war against NATO. Putin is at war against NATO, and he needs to be defeated. To change the correlation of forces, you do 5 things. 1, you actually sign up and align yourself with Ukraine's objectives, which is total territorial reconstitution. If Ukraine wants to change that, that's their decision. But when you don't have full endorsement of that, you're saying the wrong signal to the Ukrainians and definitely the wrong signal to the Russians. 2, weapons without the restrictions. 3, real economic sanctions. So you body slam the economy. We should be putting secondary sanctions out there so that Putin cannot generate revenues from his oil and gas sales. The Europeans are still buying gas from Russia. It's going through Ukraine. It's unbelievable to me. Fifth, you really start up an information campaign to roil up opposition against the war. You weaponize the power of truth. And then you really move forward on NATO membership. Now, NATO membership is only credible, or its Article 5 security guarantee is only credible if you have a deterrent force in Ukraine. But I think that even isn't going to get you to a ceasefire. You have to have that deterrent force in there, whether under a NATO flag or coalition willing, to force the ceasefire. Because until Putin sees a Western transatlantic military presence ready to deter and protect the territory Ukraine currently controls, Putin's going to continue to grind away. And I'm just not as optimistic as some about how much time Ukraine has. So there's some urgency. That's why I'm saying that Europeans now need to start getting serious and coming up with a concept, because that's what Trump is going to expect. If you don't, I think there's a risk that Trump could actually walk away from this and say, this is a European issue.
Thank you, Ian. Dr. Kopechny, I want to give you a chance to respond to that, but also ask you, as we talk about a potential ceasefire or negotiated end to the war, what do you see as the needs to keep in mind how this could be durable? What are the risks to your security, and what's needed for this big deterrence factor?
First, I have to say, it's such an honor to be here, both of the gentlemen. I mean, I can sign under every word they are saying, really. So my jumping in will be very, complimentary, and just agreeing with what has been said. I fully agree with Jan's sense of urgency. I also do understand the sense of urgency related to the presence of the NATO troops before the ceasefire. What is being discussed these days is precisely this sense of urgency. I hope that we will move forward with this, given the pressure and the expectations of Trump regarding this. So far, all the discussions have been about peacekeeping troops after the ceasefire is done, but I fully agree with the perspective shared by Jan regarding the conditions. And that's why I'm a bit skeptical about a ceasefire as well, because I don't see anything that could stop the Russian forces from gaining more territory in the upcoming months. So to answer the question on the durability and on the real deterrence, I would say three things. Of course, it's the quantity of weapons, and it's the level of technology that will be shared with Ukraine. I'm not saying given, donated. We're talking about brutally pragmatist, contractual foreign policy that we can expect from over the ocean. And it's fine. It's foreseeable. It's something that can be counted with. So we need to satisfy the economic demands and expectations from our allies from over the ocean. When it comes to who is gonna pay for the American weapons. So far, the discussion has been, but only this year, by the way, that yes, the U.S. taxpayers' money goes to U.S. companies. It's been emphasized, not so much, unfortunately, but it's already there. But the discussion now is different. The U.S. doesn't want to pay the whole sum for the U.S. companies. The discussion is Europeans should pay for American weapons. Plus, because we need the weapons, and that's why I'm saying it, for a credible deterrence. There are only a few countries, to give an example, everybody was like, oh, it's the beginning of the end of the world with the Oreshnik missile. No, it's not. It's a concept from the 60s, but okay. But yes, it's powerful. And there are only like 3 systems in the world that can detect it and take it down. And honestly, only one of them can be expected to do this, and it's the American one. So there are plenty of technologies that can only be bought in the US, and the US government will not want to pay for it. And if there will be any sort of, realistic interaction between the Ukrainian side and the American side, I am confident it will be based not on donations, but on loans that will be very, market-oriented. So you don't pay in time, so the coal mine or whatever is the guarantee will be confiscated in, for whatever the entity is providing the guarantees or the loans themselves. But still, within this reality, I think it's doable. And when we talk about deterrence, we need to talk about this kind of technologies that can only be bought in the US and that Europeans will have to pay for. And third, we're all talking about, what should we do? What should we do in Central Europe, Western Europe, in the US? But there is also a crucial component that's now losing the territory in Ukraine, in my opinion. And that's what Ukrainians need to do. And that's the system of mobilization. It has been very politicized for a year and a half, now even internationally politicized with, alleged US pressure to, modernize the system of mobilization. But it has been said, the number of shells of large caliber ammo has come from 1 to 10. So I will not tell you the specific number, but it's below 1 to less than 2. So it's like 1 to, I can't specify it, but from 1 to 10, 1 to less than 2, right? I mean, it sounds like a bad linguistic joke, but sorry, but you understand, it's like something between 1.5 and 1.7. With all heavy military equipment, except for main battle tanks, it's almost equal. And we were not there 1 year ago, and definitely not 3 years ago. But the biggest disadvantage Ukraine currently has is in their soldiers because of a dysfunctional mobilization system. And I don't want to go too forward with this, but it's one of the biggest problems. And a serious deterrence is about having soldiers that can fight, that the opponents see can fight, and that can be turned in the front lines, sustainably. So that's my response.
Thank you. I've got some more questions, but I also want to remind our online audience you can use askac.org to submit yours, and our in-person audience, we'll turn to you shortly. Mikola, do you want to touch on that issue of mobilization?
Yeah, I'd like to, because it's a very, indeed, complex and controversial issue. Why it's complex? Because all the problems that we've seen before, they united, combine, and create this Gordian knot that is very difficult to cut. And basically, the major problem is that, unlike in the first half of the 20th century, we have a different demographics. And basically, the choice for Ukrainian president is the following one. Either you mobilize young people and deserve a chance to survive, or you mobilize people, then get decimated, and what is the future of Ukrainian nation? That's a very difficult choice to make. That's why usually when I ask this question, I say that this problem can be only addressed jointly. It's not the problems that can be solved by Ukraine, because we have our own limits of resources. Just take the issue of training range. So we raise our figures, public figures. I'm not open secret. After the new mobilization law, we managed to raise 25,000 troops. But we have a limits of a training range. So people wait the moment before they get to the training range to get a basic training. Then it's a quality of basic training, which is another problem. There is a quality of command and control at different levels. Because, surprise, surprise, but Ukraine can't indefinitely compensate lack of firepower with professionalism. Sooner or later, professionalism ends. And you need to stop this degradation. And the only the way to stop this degradation is more firepower, even more than we have now. Because otherwise, we can't stop this degradation and also jointly address all the problems. And eventually agree that there should be involvement of the third parties. Because right now we have a paradox. Russia, which is nominally more powerful in terms of manpower, is already engaged in third parties. And Ukraine, which is weaker in terms of manpower, still have partners which decide maybe will come after the ceasefire framework or whatsoever. Maybe it's necessary to start to talk about not only about ceasefire, but also before ceasefire. Because we also have our own limits. And we already did a great job. We earned our partners 33 months over time. It's a huge amount of time for proper decisions. And Ukraine, as the biggest donor of security right now, deserves a chance to survive as a nation. So we need to balance all the requirements. And otherwise, it's not fair. I would say. But simultaneously, well, I also want to touch upon a little bit what was mentioned by Jan. So, ambitious plan. I'd like to have this ambitious plan. The only problem is that when you have a coalition, a big one, usually this coalition agrees to the least common denominator, not the biggest one, the highest one. I'd like to have this highest one denominator. Right now, what is achievable is to try to stop Russia and to make it live with at least current front line, whatever it would be. Because we've seen in this, again, 33 months, how it's difficult to have this ambitious plan voiced to defeat Russians fully, to throw them out, and to find resources. And the Ukrainian strategy, the whole Ukrainian strategy, was based on these assumptions that we would gain time, and we'll see this mobilization on scale of World War I, World War II, Cold War, but it's not materializing, unfortunately. That's why we need to balance like all the tasks while confronting Russians, while attaining some goals as a basis for the whatever at least acceptable framework, but simultaneously being preserved as a nation. We are waging total war. The major problem of a total war is that you need to confront your enemy, but not allow yourself to be torn apart from inside. That's a major problem for Ukraine. And that's a major difficulty, and it touches upon the issue of mobilization, and it touches upon the issue that, unfortunately, not all of our partners, not all of the politicians or the societies are ready to subscribe to this very beautiful plan I personally also support.
Thank you. So we've heard the Czech perspective and the Ukrainian perspective. On mobilization, do you think this is an issue that's playing out in the discussions in Washington as well?
I think it's an issue that a lot of people turn to when they want to criticize the Ukrainians and take blame off of themselves for our inadequate response. Sure, I think the Ukrainians probably should be mobilizing more of the people in the 18 to 25 age group, but I'm not sure that's going to be decisive at this point. What's going to be decisive is whether or not the West, the transatlantic community, wants to leverage the overmatch it has against Russia. I mean, we all kind of hem and haw about how difficult it is to support Ukrainians, but it haunts me every time I look at the NATO charts and see that the combined GDP of NATO allies is $54 trillion, and Russia is less than 2. That's more than 25 times. NATO spends, what, $1.5 trillion on defense. Russia, they say its budget's probably going to, in 2025, the Russians say it's going to be $128 billion. Probably more like 150, 160. Less than a tenth of what the alliance spends on defense. So for me, it really begs the question, how is it, why is it that the transatlantic community is enabling Ukraine to crush this invasion? And it comes down to a simple matter of political will and a failure by NATO to realize that Russia is at war with it. I mean, Russia is doing massive hybrid attacks, and yet we don't even respond to them. We had a Norwegian fishing boat pulling up its nets in Norwegian waters, and a Russian ship fired on it. Was there a NATO response? No. I mean, Russia is against us. They're mucking around in our elections. We don't have the same war mindset that Putin does, and as a result, we have ceded the initiative. We need to change, and we need to change with urgency.
Thank you. So we're talking about how to fight the war, how to potentially end the war, but I also want to turn to the matter of reconstruction. So this question's for you. What are the areas where it's most critical that Kyiv gets substantial and immediate aid from the EU and from the US for a successful reconstruction strategy?
Absorption capacity, which means the ability of the end users of whatever is being destroyed, will be destroyed, has been destroyed, the end users of the equipment, of the technologies, of the services in Ukraine, in the municipalities, in the city companies, in the state companies, to be able to process, to write a project, file it, ask for a loan, sometimes for a donation or grant, but mostly ask for a loan and start working through loan financing. Start working with international financial institutions, with their own domestic banking institutions. There are only 75 municipalities that out of 1,500 in Ukraine that do have any experience with loan financing. I mean, it will be up to those municipalities, the leadership, their management, to file through bureaucratic procedure, a proposal to a bank which will say yes or no. And if they have little experience, it will always say no. If they have bad track record in financing, whatever, they will say no. And on this yes or no depends whether they will get the cogeneration unit, the combined heat and power unit, the water treatment plant, a modernization of a hospital. It all turns to this very specific thing which we label absorption capacity. No matter how many smart people and great people are working in Kiev central offices, and there are many, it then depends on the end user, and there is a critical, say, understaffing there.
Thank you. All right, we're going to turn to our in-person audience. If you have a question, please raise your hand and we will bring a microphone over to you. Going once, going twice. Okay, over there. And please introduce yourself as well.
Hi, my name is Cameron Munter. I'm a former American diplomat now living in Prague. And my question is for Mr. Kopechny on the reconstruction. Do you sense on these questions that you're raising that there is the kind of discussion going on within European allies about the changes that need to take place in the structure? We know what needs to take place in the municipalities in Ukraine. Is there an urgency or a way forward in Europe among governments and especially with your partners in business?
Well, you know, for any bank that is now being involved, I mean, foreign bank that is now being involved in Ukraine, there are two basic risks. One, for the risk assessment teams. One is the war risk, some kinetic destruction of whatever is being paid for or provided loan for. And the second, but actually in more cases or more important, is the so-called economic risk, which is tied to a word very often associated with Ukrainian business, a way of doing business, which is corruption. It's a problem, you know, corruption which is tied to anti-money laundering legislation. And, you know, for the banks, it's not a normative, it's not a value thing, it's a very technical process. You either fit in or you don't. And in many cases, this is the problem. So this is a structural issue that European institutions are working with, so that we at least clear the war risk. And this is the essence of the European assistance, of the European financial assistance, not for the budget, it's clear. We need the Ukraine state to function. That's why we are sending the dozens of billions of euros/dollars every year from the US and from the EU. But then there are single-digit billions of euros for the program financing, and those are, in a sense, like 90% loans. And these loans are provided in the form of guarantees to banks that provide loans for whatever entity, private, state, municipal. And none of these banks does, you know, when they're in Ukraine, does really, say, palpable conditions on the provision of loans. And that's why we want them to make the money cheaper, by providing these guarantees. And by sort of erasing the war risks from the mental calculations. And we all know, already now it's not about Trump, it's not about the new administration. It's happened already last year. We have moved away from, say, the mentality of grant financing to the mentality of loan financing, overall, globally. The Koreans, the Japanese, the Europeans, the Americans. It's already happened. And so what we try to do is to attract as many investors as possible from the private sector, as many banking institutions, financial institutions, to go in there to a very high-risk market. Because for us, it's politics, it's geopolitics, it's security, plus it's normative. But for them, it's numbers. And they need to be incentivized and motivated to go somewhere where, it's high risk, high potential revenue, but it's troubling. You know, we have so many bad experiences, especially over the past year. I don't want to get into details, but it's a troubling market environment for any investor, and all our major companies are really having serious problems when it comes to, say, rule of law and their investments.
Thank you. Any additional questions in our audience?
Hello, good evening, everyone. I'm Valery Bojan from the Embassy of Romania. I would have a question for Mykola. You said that one of the, let's say, objective of Putin's bombing on critical infrastructure is to destroy the cohesion of the Ukrainian nation. I would come here. What's the state of this national cohesion of Ukrainian society? Is it strongly united around the leadership of Ukraine? Does it understand, let's say, the importance of this cohesion? Because from here, I think, maybe I am wrong, it comes the problems with recruitment of soldiers, etc. Thank you.
Well, Ukrainians are united around the idea of Ukraine. That's the most important thing. We are a political nation, and the fact that we may be not able to recover quickly all temporary lost territories doesn't mean that we do not need to defend what territories we possess, and people understand this difference. That's the most important thing. Otherwise, well, Ukraine is not unique in terms of challenges, in terms of problems countries face in a third year of such a war. And basically we are kind of running an experiment when you have such a kind of war and you have a democracy. Because to a certain extent, democracy and wars they are in a conflict, including in the issue of mobilization. Because basically democracy is built around the idea of a human as a centerpiece, as a pinnacle. Every single human life is important, but in war someone needs to take weaponry and fight. So there is a conflict, inherent one, and you need to mitigate this conflict to basically affect people's perceptions that their survival chances are bigger than 50%, so they're ready to join ranks. Otherwise, again, what we currently have in terms of problem is that we need to have a basically new consensus around what is attainable in this war, around which we can unite Ukrainian society, and around which we can unite Ukrainian partners and then deliver. Because otherwise, of course, the confusion is going to increase, and the different opinions that would tear apart the society would increase. So basically, the major challenge is right now to find another acceptable consensus that can be then supported by our partners, and then we can deliver quickly in a year, maybe a year and a half. Because otherwise we'll have a problem, but Ukrainian society is doing its best in terms of what we went through, what kind of support we have, and you can't indefinitely count on the level of resiliency you've seen in the first half a year of a big war. So it should be supported. Again, I need to remind from time to time people who are less interested or have to study war. Society, states, and war, it's not like a mechanic clock. You just oiled, you just checked, and it worked the same way. It's a living mechanism. And you need to take account all the risk of accumulating weariness, accumulating exhaustion, and not to allow to the breaking point, so-called, to come. So we need to be aware of this risk, but we are not approaching right now this point of no return breaking point, but we need to build a new consensus. Build a new consensus and implement it. That's the most urgent task both for Ukraine, Ukrainian authorities, and our partners we have here.
Thank you. Any additional questions in our audience in person? All right, I'll go to our online questions, but raise your hand if something comes up. All right, Ian. Thomas from Washington says, you made a vital point that security momentum requires political will, but how do we communicate the importance of defense spending, aid to Ukraine, and a just and secure peace to NATO publics, thereby providing that political pressure on politicians? And do Central European countries hold lessons here for the US and other NATO allies, like France and Germany?
It's a matter of leadership. You need heads of state to come out and say this is an urgent national security priority. You need to explain what the risks are, and it is a real risk that this Ukraine could lose and could lead to a wider war that, in the case of the United States and others, would drag it into what could be literally a global conflagration. We haven't had that from President Biden. We've had maybe one 7-minute speech, and that's it. I'm not sure what other heads of state in Europe have said. I was struck by the fact that Chancellor Scholz at the big EU summit came out and said, assistance to Ukraine is important, but not at the expense of German pensions and health care. that is not the language that one uses to convince a public that this is an urgent priority, warranting the resources and risks that comes with its execution. So, unfortunately for Thomas, I don't have a better word, a more complex answer or more elaborate answer than we need our leaders to stand up. Because I know in the United States, there's a lot more support out there to do a lot more in support of Ukraine. We're just not leveraging it. Our president is not leveraging it. And it's the same case with most of the other NATO allies.
If I may compliment, yes, there definitely is a link between the leaders' decisions and the will of the people, and it should always be such. But let's be honest, in the first year of the war, in the first year of the full-scale invasion, I mean, the public wanted us to support Ukraine all over the lines. There was only hesitance, except for a few cases. Were the leaders listening to the voice of the people? Definitely not. So yes, now there is this fatigue or whatever, like people don't want to get too much of information about Ukraine anymore. So yes, the leaders don't even need to check that, but what I'm trying to say, yes, sometimes you need to mobilize the will of the people, but it doesn't guarantee you that you will actually do it as a leader. Because again, in the beginning, every leader had the popular support for the decisions, and none of them has done the big ones. I'm talking about big countries. So it's not only about the will of the people and how to communicate it. It's about like the statesmanhood, but by the way, is in every country. We are no exception. We could have done so many things much better here, also in Poland, everywhere. Still. And in Ukraine as well, by the way. Everybody makes mistakes.
Have you found something most successful here in how to communicate that need?
Which one?
The need, well, I guess all of it. The need for supporting security, for spending, for focusing on Ukraine and the threat from Russia.
Well, our government is particularly unpopular among the public. And there is just one area in which it's less unpopular, which is foreign policy. But so what works out is 3 pillars. That's our strategy, how to communicate, because it's the truth. 3 pillars. Why do we support Ukraine? Because it's in the Czech national interest, in all of the 3 pillars. Czech national interest, Czech national interest, Czech national interest. Czech national interest in security. When they go through Ukraine, mobilize Ukrainians, put them on the trucks, they go further west. There's no debate about it. Second, it's economy. The Czech economy is doing much better because of the influx of the Ukrainian refugees. We are very grateful. They have chosen us as their second home. And, they are very well integrated. 80% of them are working. We are very happy for them. And also, our export has risen to Ukraine by our support. And third, values. The idea of international order, the idea of somebody doing so terrible things to our brotherly nation, coming from our side, like from the perspective that, yes, the Russians came in 1968, they invaded us and stayed for 20 years with 140,000 soldiers, plus they didn't do such massacres as they have been doing in Ukraine, trying really to wipe out the nation, the idea of the nation, but also the people and the culture. So a genocide going on in Ukraine, that's something you can't just shut your eyes. So we use both, or not both, 3 of these things,
Thank you. Okay, Ian, we've got an anonymous question. I'll pitch it to you, but anyone else want to jump in? What is the message to NATO allies? What do you say about those who are hesitant to extend security guarantees for a secure and just peace?
I think they're being short-sighted. They're setting themselves up for a major conflagration. It's going to be far more costly, far more risky, far more escalatory than what we have right now. And I have to say, I think we're at a very dangerous moment. I said it before, but we have 3 major regional contingencies going on right now. High-intensity warfare that's got over 1 million combatant casualties and KIAs in the heart of Europe. We've got spreading violence in the Middle East. We have China acting with increasing aggressiveness and provocativeness in the Indo-Pacific. And these are not separate regional events. In 2014, when Putin invaded Ukraine, that was driven by Putin's regional ambitions. It was shaped by the European geopolitical landscape and military balance of power. Not today. Now we have an axis of upheaval, China, North Korea, and Iran. We have North Koreans fighting against the Ukrainians. We have the Chinese fueling Russia's war machine, buying its energy to finance it, pumping in massive amounts of dual-use technology to sustain Russia's war industry. We have waves and waves of Iranian drones savaging Ukrainian towns and cities. And then the Russians are giving technology to the Ukrainians, they're giving technology to the North Koreans. 3 of those 4 powers in this axis of upheaval are nuclear powers. One is on the cusp of being a nuclear power. This is a very, very dangerous moment. And if we continue in our passivity, we're just going to encourage our adversaries to step it up. Because what they're seeing is a moment of weakness in the transatlantic community. And they see a moment to seize it. And for me, it's not easy, but it's a clear prioritization. If you can stop the war in Ukraine, you can stop a war that has some semblance of justice, some semblance of stability, and you do it decisively, you're going to bring stability back to Europe, or some sort of semblance of stability back to Europe. Not peace, but military stability. You put Ukraine on defensive. You impose defeat on Putin. That weakens the axis of upheaval, maybe makes even Russia look a little bit more inward. And you're finally pushing back on global dynamics that are increasingly precarious. That's the action that has to be taken, and the foremost priority is ensuring we defeat Russia in Ukraine.
I like that as the final note to end on. So thank you. Thank you to the panelists. This was very interesting. I appreciate your insight. And I will now turn it over to Denise for final remarks.
Thank you to our audience, both online and in person. Before we wrap, please also join me in thanking our speakers and our incredible hosts at the U.S. Embassy and the American Center. Thank you very much.